What happens when the foster kid they threw away becomes the only surgeon who can save their real daughter's life? And what would you do if you discovered that same daughter had been stealing your life's work and winning awards for it? This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming everything they said you'd never be. The fluorescent lights in operating room 3 cast everything in harsh white as I worked on my third trauma patient of the night. Blood pressure dropping, internal bleeding, the kind of case where every second counted, and I had become really good at making those seconds matter. My hands moved with the precision that had taken 15 years to perfect. Suction here, clamp there, the familiar dance between life and death that had become my world since I left Boston behind. That's when my phone buzzed against my scrubs. I ignored it. Rule number 1 in trauma surgery: nothing interrupts the work. But it kept buzzing. And buzzing. The kind of persistent ring that meant someone was desperate. Dr. Linwood. My resident called out, "Your phone." "Not now," I muttered, focusing on the torn artery beneath my fingers. This kid couldn't be more than 20. Someone's son, someone's whole world, but the buzzing didn't stop. "Take it," I finally said to Sarah, my scrub nurse. "If it's not life or death, hang up." Sarah stepped back, pulling her gloves off to answer. I heard her voice behind me, professional and clipped. "This is Seattle General Or 3. Yes, she's in surgery. What are you sure?" Something in her tone made me look up. Sarah was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Confusion, mixed with something that looked almost like pity. "Dr. Linwood," she said quietly. "It's Boston Presbyterian Hospital. They say it's urgent. They need you to make medical decisions for someone named Amelia Rhodes." The clamp in my hand trembled. Just for a second. But in a trauma bay, a second can be everything. Amelia Rhodes. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 9 years. Not since the day I graduated medical school and realized that not a single member of the family who had raised me bothered to show up. Not since I finally understood that being grateful was never going to be enough to make them see me as anything more than the charity case they'd saved from the foster system. "Tell them I'll call back in 20 minutes. I managed refocusing on my patient. My real patient. The one whose life actually depended on me right now. But even as I worked, my mind was racing. Emergency contact me. The girl they'd made clear wasn't really family, the one they'd frozen out the moment I stopped being convenient. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the hospital corridor, my scrub still damp with someone else's blood, holding my phone like it might explode. "This is Dr. Mara Linwood." "Doctor, thank God. This is Dr. Patricia Chen at Boston Presbyterian. We have Amelia Rhodes in our ICU. Massive cerebral hemorrhage. She's critical, and according to her medical proxy forms, you're listed as the primary decision maker." I almost laughed. If the situation wasn't so insane, I might have actually laughed out loud right there in the hallway. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. I haven't spoken to the Rhodes family in years." "Doctor, I'm looking at the paperwork right now. It's your name, your medical license number, your contact information. Filed 3 months ago." 3 months ago, right around the time my research on trauma centers in underserved communities had been featured in the New England Journal of Medicine. Right around the time my name had started appearing on medical conference panels. How interesting. "Dr. Linwood? Are you there?" "I'm here." My voice sounded strange even to me. "What's her condition?" "Unstable. We've got her on life support, but she needs specialized neurosurgical consultation. The kind of expertise that—" She paused. "The kind that you have." Of course they did. The only time they'd call me. The only time I'd hear from any of them. When they needed something. When they needed a savior. I closed my eyes and saw Amelia as I remembered her. Golden hair, perfect grades, perfect life. The real daughter, the one who got birthday parties and college funds and unconditional love, while I got reminders about how lucky I was to have a roof over my head. "I can be there in 6 hours, I heard myself saying. "Doctor, are you sure? I mean traveling across the country for a patient." "She's not just a patient." The words came out flat, emotionless. "She's family." The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but it was the lie they'd created, the paperwork they'd filed, the emergency contact they'd named when it served their purposes. I hung up and booked the next flight to Boston. Not because I owed them anything, not because part of me still hoped for their love or their recognition. I booked that flight because 9 years ago, I'd taken an oath. First, do no harm. And despite everything they'd done to me, despite all the ways they'd made me feel invisible and unwanted, I wasn't going to let someone die just to prove a point. Even if that someone was Amelia Rhodes. Even if saving her meant walking back into the house of mirrors that had spent years convincing me I didn't really exist. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't care about your family drama. And neither, apparently, did I. On the plane to Boston, staring out at the clouds 30,000 feet below, I couldn't help but think about the last time I'd made this trip. It was for my medical school graduation, and I was still naive enough to believe they might show up. They didn't, but sitting there watching the landscape change from the mountains of Washington to the sprawling cities of the East Coast, all I could think about was that house. The Rhodes family mansion at 47 Brattle Street in Cambridge. The house that was supposed to be my salvation, but never quite felt like home. I was 14 when they took me in. 14 and broken in ways that most kids couldn't even imagine. My mom had overdosed in our studio apartment in Roxbury, and I'd been the one to find her. 3 days of going to school, coming home, and pretending she was just sleeping before a neighbor finally called social services. The Rhodes family heard about my case through Diana's charity work. She was on the board of some foundation for at-risk youth, and apparently I was the perfect project. Smart enough to reflect well on them, damaged enough to make them look like saints. "We saved you," became their favorite phrase. Not, "We love you," or, "You're part of our family now." Just, "We saved you," as if that was supposed to be enough. As if gratitude was a fair trade for belonging. And maybe at 14, I believed it could be. The house was everything my old life wasn't. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a kitchen bigger than the apartment where my mom had died. Amelia's room was on the second floor, painted soft pink with a canopy bed and shelves lined with trophies and ribbons. My room was on the third floor next to the guest bathroom with furniture that looked like it had come from a catalog clearance sale, but I was grateful. God, I was so grateful in the beginning. I remember my first week there. Diana took me shopping for school clothes, but not at the department stores where Amelia got her wardrobe. We went to outlet malls and secondhand shops, Diana explaining how important it was to be practical and not wasteful. Meanwhile, Amelia was getting fitted for a custom dress for her upcoming Sweet 16, a party I'd helped set up but wouldn't really be part of. "You understand, don't you, sweetie?" Diana had said, her voice sticky sweet like it got whenever she was about to ask something unreasonable. Amelia's had this planned for months, and her friends, well, they might not understand about your background. My background, like poverty, was contagious. But the worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even the constant reminders that I should be grateful for every meal, every roof, every opportunity they graciously provided. The worst part was watching Amelia get everything I'd ever dreamed of while being told that wanting those same things made me selfish. When Amelia struggled with algebra, she got a tutor from Harvard. When I struggled with the same subject, Gordon handed me a workbook from Barnes & Noble and told me it was good to learn independence. When Amelia wanted to try ballet, they enrolled her in classes at the Boston Ballet School. When I mentioned I might like to try piano, Diana explained that hobbies were expensive, and maybe I should focus on more practical skills. When Amelia got her driver's license, they bought her a BMW. When I got mine, Gordon gave me bus passes and said the public transportation built character. But I worked with it. I adapted. I convinced myself that this was still better than where I'd come from, and that maybe if I just tried harder, achieved more, proved my worth, they'd eventually see me as more than their charity case. That delusion lasted until senior year of high school. I'd been working on a science project for months, a research study on water purification systems in developing countries. It It was the kind of project that could get you noticed by college admissions committees, maybe even earn scholarship money. I spent every free moment in the school lab, staying late, coming in on weekends. I was obsessed. This project was going to be my ticket to a future that wasn't built on other people's pity. When the Massachusetts State Science Fair announced the winners, I couldn't believe it. First place? Out of over 300 entries from across the state. I ran home with the trophy bursting through the front door of that perfect house, practically vibrating with excitement. Diana Gordon, I won! I actually won! I found them in the living room with Amelia, who was crying into a tissue. Again. That's wonderful, dear, Diana said, without looking up from where she was stroking Amelia's hair. But please keep your voice down. Amelia's having a difficult day. But I won the state science fair, I said again, holding up the trophy like they might have missed it the first time. Gordon finally looked at me and I saw something in his expression that I'd been too young to recognize before. Not pride, not excitement, irritation. That's great, Mara, really, but right now we need to focus on your sister. She's been having anxiety about college applications, and celebrating your achievement right now might make her feel worse about herself. Your sister. He called her my sister, but somehow it never worked. The other way around. Maybe you could put the trophy in your room for now, Diana suggested, her voice gentle but firm. We can celebrate later when Amelia's feeling better. Later never came. The trophy went on my dresser next to my other achievements that never quite seemed worth celebrating. Honor roll certificates, academic awards, volunteer recognition. All of it gathering dust in a room that felt more like a storage closet than a bedroom. And that became the pattern. Every accomplishment I had was somehow a threat to Amelia's self-esteem. Every moment of recognition I earned was quietly redirected, postponed, or minimized to protect her feelings. When I got accepted to Boston University with a partial scholarship, the family dinner conversation focused on Amelia's anxiety about her SAT scores. When I was named valedictorian of my high school class, they missed the ceremony because Amelia had a therapy appointment. When I graduated from college summa cum laude, they sent a card. By then, I was starting to understand. I wasn't their daughter, I was their good deed. The before and after picture they could point to at charity galas. The success story that proved their generosity. But success stories aren't supposed to outshine the family that created them. Don't overshadow your sister, became Diana's favorite refrain whenever I achieved something. As if my accomplishments were somehow taking something away from Amelia, instead of just being the result of years of working twice as hard for half the recognition. The really twisted part, I started believing them. Started thinking that maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe gratitude really was enough, and wanting more made me ungrateful. It took years of therapy and medical school to realize the truth. They didn't save me. They collected me, like a trophy themselves, proof of their own goodness, their own generosity. And the moment I stopped being convenient, the moment my success started making them uncomfortable instead of proud, they were ready to let me go. I just hadn't realized it yet. College was my escape plan. Boston University wasn't Harvard, but it was far enough from Brattle Street to feel like freedom. And for the first time in years, I was going to succeed entirely on my own terms. I threw myself into everything. Pre-med track, obviously, but also work-study programs, research opportunities, volunteer positions, at free clinics in Roxbury, the same neighborhoods where I'd grown up, where I could actually make a difference, instead of just being someone's pet project. I worked 3 jobs, mornings at the campus coffee shop, afternoons, tutoring underclassmen in chemistry, and weekends at a medical supply company filing insurance claims. Every dollar I earned was a dollar I didn't have to ask the Rhodes family for. Every A on my transcript was proof that I could do this without them. By junior year, I had a 4.0 GPA and research publications that most graduate students would kill for. Medical school was no longer a dream. It was an inevitability. I applied to 12 schools, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, UCSF, all the top programs. But I also applied to state schools, private universities, anywhere that would give me a chance to become the doctor I'd always imagined I could be. The acceptance letters started arriving in March of my senior year. University of Washington, George Washington University, Boston University's own medical program. One by one, they piled up on my desk in that tiny dorm room I'd called home for 4 years. But the letter I wanted most never came. Harvard Medical School sent a thin envelope in April, a rejection letter that was polite but definitive. While your academic record is impressive, we felt that other candidates were a better fit for our program. I was disappointed, sure. But I had options, good options. I was going to be a doctor no matter what some admissions committee at Harvard thought about me. It wasn't until 3 years later during my clinical rotations that I learned the truth. I was working a pediatric surgery rotation when one of my supervising physicians, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, mentioned that she'd taught at Harvard for 15 years before moving to clinical practice. "You know," she said during a break between surgeries, "I always wondered what happened with your application. My application to Harvard Med School. I wrote you a recommendation letter when you were at BU. One of the strongest I'd ever written, actually. You had exactly the kind of background and drive we were looking for." My stomach dropped. I never got into Harvard. I know. That's what surprised me, especially after someone called to withdraw the letter. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Someone withdrew your recommendation, a woman claiming to be your guardian, said there had been some family concerns about your mental health and academic pressure. She was very polite, very concerned. Said you'd decided medical school might not be the right path after all. I couldn't breathe. What did this woman sound like? Older, very well spoken, had that kind of Upper East Side accent, said she was calling from Cambridge, I think. The whole thing seemed odd, but she had all your personal information. Said she was protecting your best interests. Diana. That night, I went home to my tiny studio apartment and pulled out every piece of correspondence I'd ever received from the Rhodes family. Birthday cards, Christmas cards, the occasional thinking of you note during finals week. All of them signed in the same flowing, perfect handwriting I'd known since I was 14. The same handwriting Dr. Martinez described in the letter that had withdrawn my recommendation to Harvard Medical School. I stared at those cards for hours. Years of "Love, Diana," and "Proud of you," and "Hope you're well" written in script so perfect it could have been printed. Script that had convinced a Harvard admissions officer that my own guardian thought I was too unstable for medical school. The next time I went home, and by then I only went home for major holidays, I confronted her. It was Christmas morning, and we were sitting in that perfect living room with its perfect tree and perfectly wrapped presents. Amelia was opening yet another expensive gift while I unwrapped a generic sweater from Macy's that still had the clearance tag tucked inside. "Diana," I said quietly, "did you call Harvard Medical School about my application?" She didn't even pause in folding tissue paper. "What do you mean, dear? Someone called Harvard and withdrew one of my recommendation letters. Someone claiming to be my guardian." Now she looked up. That same expression Gordon had given me the night I won the state science fair. Not guilt. Not surprise. Irritation. "Mara, I think you might be confused. Dr. Martinez remembers the call. She remembers the conversation. She said the woman sounded just like you." Diana set down the tissue paper and gave me that smile. The one she used at charity events when someone asked an uncomfortable question about where the donated money actually went. "Sweetie," she said, her voice so gentle it was almost a whisper, "we just didn't want you to be disappointed. You aim so high sometimes. It's not good for someone like you. Someone like me. Not someone from my background, not someone with my history. Someone like me." As if I were a different species altogether. "You withdrew my recommendation letter. I made a phone call out of concern for your well-being. Medical school is incredibly stressful, and given your history with anxiety." "What anxiety? I've never had anxiety." The anxiety you developed after your mother's death. The therapy you needed when you first came to us. Surely you remember. I did remember therapy, grief counseling that Diana had insisted I needed. Sessions where I was encouraged to talk about my trauma and my adjustment issues. Problems I'd never felt I had until Diana kept insisting they existed. And now, years later, she was using those same therapy sessions as proof that I was too fragile for medical school. You sabotaged my application. I protected you from a disappointment that might have set back your progress. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. In her mind, she'd done me a favor. You don't get to make those decisions for me. Mara, honey, you're part of this family. When you hurt, we all hurt. We just want what's best for you. But that wasn't true, and we both knew it. They didn't sabotage me to protect Amelia from feeling overshadowed. They didn't withdraw that recommendation letter because they thought I couldn't handle the pressure. They did it because somewhere along the way they'd stopped seeing me as a real person, with real dreams and real potential. I'd become a story they told about themselves, the troubled foster kid they'd rescued and guided toward a nice, quiet, grateful life. A life that didn't include outshining their real daughter by getting into Harvard Medical School. The pain wasn't just neglect. It wasn't even sabotage. It was erasure. The systematic deletion of my ambitions, my achievements, my right to want more than what they thought I deserved. They'd spent years teaching me to make myself smaller, to apologize for my successes, to believe that gratitude was more important than dreams. And when making me smaller wasn't enough, when I kept growing and achieving and refusing to disappear, they took matters into their own hands. That Christmas morning, sitting in their perfect living room, I realized something that should have been obvious years earlier. I was never going to be their daughter. I was never going to earn their love, or their pride, or their genuine support. Because you can't love something you've never allowed yourself to see as fully human. I finished opening my clearance sweater, said thank you with a smile that felt like glass, and started planning my exit from their lives. It would take me 2 more years to work up the courage to actually leave, but that was the moment I understood that staying was slowly killing the person I was meant to become, and the person I was meant to become deserved so much better than their scraps. Boston Presbyterian Hospital looked exactly the way I remembered private hospitals looking. All marble and mahogany, designed to make wealthy families feel like their money was buying them something better than medicine. It was buying them comfort. I walked through those polished hallways in my travel clothes sneakers, squeaking against floors so clean they probably got mopped every hour. My medical bag felt heavy in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. I wasn't the forgotten foster kid anymore. I was Dr. Mara Linwood, trauma surgeon here on professional consultation. The ICU was on the 7th floor. As the elevator climbed, I found myself holding my breath. 9 years. 9 years since I'd seen any of them. 9 years since I'd walked away from that house on Brattle Street and decided I was done being their charity case. The doors opened and there they were. Gordon and Diana Rhodes sitting in the family consultation area like they owned it, which, knowing them, they probably did. Major donors always got the VIP treatment. They looked older, much older. Diana's perfect blonde hair had gone silver, and she'd gotten that stretched look that expensive plastic surgery gives you when you're trying to hold back time. Gordon had developed the slight stoop that happens when the weight of your own self-importance finally starts bending your spine. But they still looked like money. Still looked like people who expected the world to arrange itself around their convenience. Diana saw me first. I watched her face go through a series of expressions. Surprise, relief, calculation, and finally that practice smile she'd perfected at charity galas. "Mara," she breathed, standing up like she was going to hug me. I stepped back. "Mrs. Rhodes," the formal address hit her like a slap. "Good. Oh, honey, you don't need to be so formal. We're family." Family. The word tasted like poison in the air between us. "I'm here in a professional capacity," I said, my voice steady and clinical. "Where's the attending physician?" Gordon stood up too, looking uncomfortable. Mara, before you see Amelia, maybe we should talk. About what? About why we listed you as her medical proxy. I almost laughed. You mean, why you use my credentials without my permission? A nurse approached us, clipboard in hand. She was young, probably fresh out of nursing school, and she looked nervous about interrupting what was clearly a tense family moment. Excuse me, Dr. Linwood, she said quietly. They told us you're here as Amelia Rhodes's medical proxy. Medical proxy. Not family member, not emergency contact. Medical proxy. The legal authority to make life and death decisions for someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. That's correct, I said, not taking my eyes off Diana's face. What's her current status? Massive cerebral hemorrhage. We've got her stabilized, but she's on life support. The neurosurgeon wants to consult with you about next steps. Diana stepped forward, that smile getting brighter and more desperate. We knew you'd come. Deep down, we knew you'd come back when we needed you. You're still part of this family, Mara. You always will be. The audacity of it hit me like a physical force. After years of silence, after sabotaging my dreams, after making it clear that I was never really their daughter, now I was family again. Now that they needed something. I'm here as a physician, I said, my voice so calm it surprised even me. Not a daughter. The words hung in the air like a blade. Diana's smile faltered and Gordon actually took a step back. Mara, Diana tried again. I know we haven't talked in a while, but 9 years, I interrupted. 9 years of silence. 9 years of not knowing if I was alive or dead. 9 years of not being family. Until today. We thought about reaching out, Gordon said weakly. When I graduated medical school, when I got my surgical residency, when I published research that made national headlines. Or just today when you needed someone to save the daughter you actually cared about. The nurse was looking increasingly uncomfortable, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Can you take me to see the patient? I asked her. Of course, Dr. Linwood. As we walked toward the ICU, I could hear Diana behind me, her voice higher and more strained than usual. Mara, please. She's your sister. I stopped walking, turned around slowly. My sister, I repeated. The sister who got everything I ever wanted while I got hand-me-downs and lectures about gratitude. The sister whose feelings I was never allowed to hurt with my achievements. The sister you protected by sabotaging my future. That's not fair, Diana said, but her voice cracked on the words. Fair. I laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. We're going to talk about fair. I followed the nurse through the ICU doors, leaving them in the waiting area. Whatever conversation they wanted to have could wait. I had a patient to see. Amelia looked smaller than I remembered. Lying there, surrounded by machines, tubes down her throat, monitors beeping steadily. She didn't look like the golden child who'd gotten everything handed to her. She looked fragile. Human. I spent 20 minutes reviewing her chart, examining her neurological responses, checking the ventilator settings. The hemorrhage was severe, but not hopeless. With the right surgical intervention and rehabilitation, she could recover. Maybe not completely, but enough to have a life. I made notes on her chart, adjusted her medication dosages, and signed the paperwork for a transfer to a specialized neurosurgical unit. Everything. Professional. Everything by the book. When I walked back out to the waiting area, Gordon was pacing and Diana was crying into a tissue. They both looked up at me with identical expressions of desperate hope. How is she? Diana asked. Stable for now. I've arranged for her transfer to Mass General. They have a better neurosurgical unit. But will she be okay? Gordon pressed. Will she recover? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd raised me for 4 years, but never once made me feel like I belonged. This man who'd taught me that wanting more than I was given made me selfish. That depends, I said finally. On what? Are you willing to let someone you once discarded save her? The question hit him like a physical blow. His face went white, and he actually staggered backward into his chair. Diana started crying harder. Mara, please. I know we made mistakes, but she's innocent in all this. She's your sister. She stopped being my sister the day you decided I wasn't really your daughter. I turned to leave, then paused. But she's still my patient. And I don't abandon my patients no matter what their families have done to me. As I walked away, I heard Gordon call after me. Mara, wait. We need to talk about this. I didn't turn around. No, we don't. You have my phone number. Clearly, since you used it without permission to list me as her proxy. The transfer will happen tomorrow morning. Make sure someone's there to sign the paperwork. The elevator doors closed on their stunned faces, and for the first time in 9 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Power. Not the kind of power that comes from money or connections or family names. The kind of power that comes from being indispensable, from having skills that can't be bought, knowledge that can't be inherited, expertise that has to be earned. They needed me now. Not the grateful foster child they'd shaped and molded and controlled. They needed Dr. Mara Linwood, the trauma surgeon, who'd built herself from nothing, despite their best efforts to keep her small. And that felt better than any family reunion ever could. I checked into the Marriott downtown as far from Cambridge as I could get while still being in the same city. Room 1247 overlooking the harbor. Clean sheets, room service, and most importantly, silence. No machines beeping. No families crying. No ghosts from my past lurking in every corner. Amelia's transfer was scheduled for 8 a.m. I'd done my job. I'd honored my oath. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to Seattle and pretend this whole nightmare had never happened. I ordered Chinese takeout and opened my laptop, planning to catch up on patient notes from the cases I'd left behind in Seattle. But my email was full of messages I hadn't had time to check during the flight. Most of it was routine. Surgical schedules, medical conference invitations, research collaboration requests, the usual flow of correspondence that comes with being a trauma surgeon with a national reputation. Then I saw one that made me stop chewing. Subject: grant application, duplicate submission, clarification needed. It was from Dr. Patricia Hendricks, someone I'd never heard of. The email signature said she was with the Morrison Foundation for Medical Innovation. I opened it. Dr. Linwood, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to request clarification regarding your recent grant application for the Community Trauma Response Initiative. Our review committee noticed that your submission appears to be substantially similar to another application we received from Ms. Amelia Rhodes of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Could you please explain why the same project concept was submitted under 2 different names? We want to ensure there are no issues of duplication or collaboration that weren't properly disclosed. My chopsticks dropped onto the hotel desk. Amelia Rhodes. Grant application. Community Trauma Response Initiative. I read the email 3 more times before it fully sank in. Then I typed back as calmly as I could manage. Dr. Hendricks, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I haven't submitted any grant applications to your foundation. Could you please send me the details of the application in question? The response came back within an hour. What Dr. Hendricks sent me was a 40-page grant proposal, professional, polished, detailed, a comprehensive plan for establishing mobile trauma units in underserved urban communities, complete with budget projections, staffing models, and implementation timelines. And every single word of it was mine. Not similar to my work, not inspired by my research. Literally, mine. Paragraphs I'd written during my 3rd year of medical school, copied verbatim. Data from my senior thesis presented without attribution. Even the title was identical to a paper I'd published in a small medical journal 5 years earlier. The only difference was the name at the top of the application. Amelia Rhodes. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through page after page of my own work being presented as hers. This wasn't just borrowing an idea or being influenced by my research. This was wholesale theft of years of my academic work. But the worst part was yet to come. According to Dr. Hendricks' follow-up email, not only had Amelia's application been approved, it had won. a $2.3 million grant to implement my trauma center model in 3 major cities. And the Morrison Foundation had been so impressed with her innovative approach that they'd scheduled her for a feature article in their quarterly publication. The headline was supposed to be, "Young Visionary Revolutionizes Emergency Care for Urban Poor." Young Visionary revolutionizes my work, my ideas, my years of research on the communities where I'd grown up. And she was getting credit as if she'd thought of it all herself. I called Dr. Hendricks directly. "This is Dr. Mara Linwood. I just received your email about the duplicate grant applications." "Oh, Dr. Linwood, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. Can you help us understand the situation?" "The situation is that Ms. Rhodes has submitted my work as her own. Every methodology, every data point, every proposed solution in that grant application is from research I conducted and published over the past 7 years. There was a long pause. "Are you saying she plagiarized your work?" "I'm saying she stole it. Completely. The only original thing in that entire application is her signature." "Dr. Linwood, these are very serious accusations. Do you have documentation to support this claim?" I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with Dr. Hendricks, walking through my publication history, sending her copies of my original research papers, providing timestamps and revision histories for documents that predated Amelia's application by years. With each piece of evidence I provided Dr. Hendricks's voice got quieter and more horrified. "Dr. Linwood, I have to ask, how do you think Ms. Rhodes got access to your unpublished research materials?" That was the question I'd been dreading, because I knew exactly how she'd gotten them. 7 years ago, when I was still in contact with her family, I shared some of my early research drafts with them. I was excited about the work, and I thought they might be interested in supporting urban health initiatives. "You shared your research with her directly?" "Not exactly. I sent it to her parents, Diana and Gordon Rhodes. They were involved in various charitable foundations, and I thought they might want to fund pilot programs." What I didn't tell Dr. Hendricks was the context of that sharing. I'd been so desperate for their approval, so hungry for any sign that they saw value in my work, that I'd sent them everything. Every draft, every proposal, every innovative idea I'd developed. I'd been like a puppy bringing them my best toys, hoping they'd finally pat me on the head and tell me I was good enough. Instead, they'd apparently filed it all away until their real daughter needed something impressive to put her name on. "Dr. Linwood, what would you like us to do with this information?" "I want my work credited properly. I want the grant funding to go to someone who will actually implement these programs, not just put their name on them. And I want a formal investigation into how this happened." "We'll begin that investigation immediately. In the meantime, I need to ask, would you be interested in submitting your own application for this funding, given that it's actually your research and your proposed implementation model?" I looked out the hotel window at Boston Harbor, at the city where I'd grown up poor and desperate, where I'd first started thinking about how emergency medical care failed the people who needed it most. "Yes," I said, "I would be very interested in that." After I hung up, I sat in that hotel room for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark window. It wasn't just stolen credit. It wasn't just academic dishonesty. It was identity theft with applause. Amelia had taken my life's work, my passion project, my plan to help people like the kid I used to be, and she'd worn it like a borrowed coat. Comfortable, well-fitting, impressive enough to get her noticed and funded and celebrated. All while I was 3,000 miles away, treating patients in Seattle trauma bays, never knowing that my ideas were being implemented under someone else's name. The girl who'd gotten everything handed to her, the perfect room, the expensive education, the unconditional love, had decided that wasn't enough. She wanted my achievements too. And her parents, the same people who'd sabotaged my Harvard application to protect her feelings, had probably helped her do it. I opened my laptop and started typing. Not an angry email or a legal threat, but something much more powerful. A comprehensive documentation of every piece of stolen research, every plagiarized paragraph, every innovative concept that Amelia Rhodes had claimed as her own. Because if they thought I was going to stay quiet about this, they'd forgotten something important about the foster kid they'd tried so hard to erase. I'd learned a long time ago how to fight for what was mine. And my work, my ideas, my future, those were definitely mine. I could have made a scene. God knows they deserved one. I could have marched back to that ICU, confronted them in front of the entire medical staff, demanded explanations and apologies and public acknowledgments of what they'd done. I could have hired a lawyer, filed lawsuits, made sure the whole story ended up in the Boston Globe with Diana and Gordon's names attached to words like fraud and exploitation. I could have done a lot of things that would have felt satisfying in the moment. Instead, I did something that felt permanent. The next morning, before my flight back to Seattle, I sat in that hotel room and wrote a single page. No emotional appeals, no personal history, no dramatic accusations, just facts. A chronological list of my publications with dates, screenshots of my original research files with metadata showing creation dates, copies of emails where I'd shared my work with the Rhodes family, side-by-side comparisons of my published papers, and Amelia's grant application highlighting identical passages. The evidence spoke for itself. Clean, clear, undeniable. I attached it all to a brief email to Dr. Hendricks and copied the Morrison Foundation's board of directors. Please find attached documentation regarding the grant application submitted by Amelia Rhodes. The attached evidence demonstrates that the entirety of Ms. Rhodes's proposal consists of research conducted and published by me over the past 7 years. I am prepared to submit my own application for this funding to implement the trauma care model I developed. Thank you for your time and consideration. Professional. Calm. Devastating. I hit send at 7:23 a.m. Then I opened my phone contacts and scrolled down to the R's. 3 numbers I'd carried for 9 years, but never called. Diana Rhodes, Gordon Rhodes, even Amelia Rhodes, a number I'd saved back when I still believed we might someday be real sisters. I deleted them all. Not blocked. Deleted. As if they had never existed in my phone, just like I had never really existed in their family. The difference was, I was choosing this erasure. This time, I was the one deciding who got to disappear. My flight back to Seattle was delayed, so I had 3 hours to kill at Logan Airport. I found myself thinking about all the angry conversations I could have had, all the confrontations I could have initiated. Part of me wanted to call Diana and hear her try to explain this away. Part of me wanted to demand an apology that would never come. But sitting there in the airport, watching families hug goodbye and couples reunite, I realized something important. I didn't need their explanations. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need anything from them at all. That realization felt like breathing for the first time in years. 6 months later, I was standing on a stage at the American College of Surgeons annual conference in Chicago, looking out at an audience of 3,000 trauma surgeons, emergency physicians, and medical researchers. The Morrison Foundation had not only awarded me the grant that had been stolen, they'd asked me to deliver the keynote address about implementing trauma care in underserved communities. My communities. The neighborhoods where I'd grown up, where kids like me still lived in apartments with broken locks and parents who couldn't afford ambulances. The most important thing I've learned in 15 years of trauma surgery, I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the conference hall, is that healing isn't just about the patient on the table. It's about understanding that every person who comes through those emergency doors has a story, has value, has the right to be saved regardless of their zip code or their insurance status or the family they were or weren't born into. I paused, looking out at faces that were actually listening, really listening. Some of us weren't born into love, but we became the reason others choose to live. The applause that followed felt different than any recognition I'd ever received. It wasn't polite charity gala clapping or obligatory academic acknowledgement. It was the sound of people who understood what I was trying to do, who saw the value in the work itself, not just the credentials attached to it. After my speech, I was surrounded by colleagues, reporters, medical students wanting to know more about the trauma center model I'd developed. But the conversation that mattered most came from a young woman who waited until the crowd had thinned out. She was maybe 22 with nervous energy and the kind of determined eyes I recognized in myself at that age. "Dr. Linwood," she said, approaching hesitantly. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "I read your paper on trauma care disparities in urban communities. The one you published 5 years ago. I'm a first-year med student at University of Illinois, and I almost quit after my first semester. I didn't think I belonged. I kept feeling like everyone else had connections and advantages that I didn't have." She paused, and I could see her gathering courage. "But your paper, it wasn't just about medical techniques. It was about understanding that the doctor who grew up in those communities might be the one who can save them. You made me believe I belonged in this field." For a moment, I couldn't speak, because this young woman wasn't thanking me for my credentials, or my surgical skills, or my professional achievements. She was thanking me for seeing her, for writing something that made her feel less alone, less like an imposter in spaces that weren't designed for people like us. Someone had truly seen me in my work, and through my work, I had seen her. That was worth more than all the family acceptance I'd ever craved. Later that night, I found myself walking through Millennium Park in Chicago, past families taking pictures and couples sharing late dinners. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't jealous of their easy intimacy, their uncomplicated love. I had something different, something I'd built myself. The next morning, I had to fly to Boston for a follow-up meeting with the Morrison Foundation about implementing the first pilot trauma center. As the plane descended over the city where I'd grown up, where I'd been broken and rebuilt and broken again, I felt something I'd never expected. Peace. I rented a car at Logan and drove through Cambridge on my way to the foundation meeting. Past Harvard, where I'd been rejected by sabotage. Past Boston University, where I'd learned to succeed on my own. Past the neighborhoods in Roxbury, where my mother had died and my real life had begun. And then, almost without thinking about it, I found myself driving down Brattle Street. The Rhodes house looked exactly the same. Perfect lawn, perfect windows, perfect facade hiding whatever imperfect reality lived inside. I pulled over and sat in my rental car looking at that mansion where I'd spent 4 years believing I was lucky to be there. Now I could see it for what it really was. Not a sanctuary, not a salvation, just a house where people lived who had never learned to see past their own reflections. I thought about Amelia, recovered now from her brain hemorrhage, but facing federal charges for grant fraud. I thought about Diana and Gordon, their reputations in their charity circles, permanently damaged by the investigation that had followed my simple factual report. I thought about the girl I'd been at 14, so desperate for their love, that I'd made myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into their idea of what I should be grateful for. That girl deserved better than what they'd given her. But more importantly, she'd found a way to become someone who didn't need their approval anymore. I started the car and drove away from Brattle Street for what I knew would be the last time. As I headed toward the downtown Boston, toward a meeting where people would listen to my ideas and fund my vision and treat me like the expert I'd become, I found myself smiling. Really smiling. I wasn't the lucky foster girl who'd been saved by the kindness of strangers. I was the uninvited miracle who'd saved herself. And now I didn't need a family photo to prove I existed. The lives I'd saved were proof enough. The kid from Roxbury who'd found her mother dead. The teenager who'd won science fairs in a house that never celebrated her victories. The medical student who'd been sabotaged by the people who claimed to love her. All of those versions of me had led to this moment, driving through the city of my pain as a stranger, to it no longer defined by what had been done to me, but by what I'd chosen to do despite it. That felt like the best kind of ending. Not revenge, not reconciliation, but something much more powerful. Freedom. Sometimes, the family that raises you isn't the family that defines you. What do you think about Mara's choice to save Amelia, despite everything? Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments below. And if stories like this resonate with you, hit that subscribe button, because everyone deserves to know they're not alone in their journey.